Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening. Hello, and welcome to this webinar about the BRM, the Brand and Retail Module. The module, one of the latest launched modules from SAC in the entire landscape of the Higg Index. So this is just an introductory webinar, just 1 hour, a brief introduction. We also have scheduled 2 more webinars, 2 times 2 hours, where we'll go much more into detail into the BRM. But let's go ahead here. So the Brand and Retail Module, the BRM, is a comprehensive assessment tool that brands and retailers can use to holistically evaluate sustainability risks and impacts across their organization's entire value chain. And we would like to introduce you to this module and explain to you how to identify top priority actions. And first of all, I would like also to introduce ourselves. So who are we? So I'm Karen Ekberg, and I'm the CEO and founder of Leadership and Sustainability. And we also have Saskia here today. So Saskia, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Karin. My name is Saskia Lössel, and I'm a Senior Sustainability Manager here at Leadership and Sustainability. I'm part of the team since April, and I'm responsible for marketing and sales activities, as well as project work, amongst others. And yes, also a very warm welcome from my side.
Thank you so much, Saskia. Great. And in case you are not familiar with using GoToWebinar, I would like to just give you some basics here. So first of all, I would like to mention that the audience is muted during the webinar in order to ensure best audio quality. So we have a very large audience today, and it would not work if you would be unmuted, all of you. But you are most welcome to send us your questions or comments during the presentation via the question function. And towards the end of the webinar, we will have time then to go through your questions. And here at the right-hand side, you can see a screenshot of the question function where you can add your questions wherever you want. And also, you can then send the question. So basically, really step-by-step, very detailed here. You click the drop-down to open up the questions. You type in your question here, and then you can send it to us. And also, it may be good for you to know that we will provide you with a link to download the presentation in a follow-up email. And there you will also get access to the recording of this webinar. Okay, so that is the introduction. And just let me just ask you, can you hear me well when I'm speaking now? Is the sound okay? Could you just comment? You can do that in the question function, please. Okay, sound is fine. Thank you so much. That's great to know. And okay, so what is leadership and sustainability? Who is leadership and sustainability, and who am I? So my name is Karen Ekberg, and I have more than 30 years of work experience working with sustainability in many different sectors, but now since more than 10 years, I'm working exclusively basically in the textile sector. Leadership and sustainability, we really want to give a very system related approach, and we work in a very systematic manner, but we also have a lot of deep knowledge in the sustainability area and also in the manufacturing area. So I was responsible for environment at Adidas during several years, where we developed an environmental strategy 2015. We implemented a supply chain management program, etc. And previously, I worked in a Swedish company called Assa Abloy. And Assa Abloy has a lot of own manufacturing entities. So I spent a lot of time in the factories there, working on our different improvement plans. And within leadership and sustainability, here you can see some of the clients that we have been working with, but we have worked with many more of the larger brands, but also mid-sized and smaller brands in the sector. And leadership and sustainability, we are also a member of Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And let me take you also through the agenda for today. So we will give you a short introduction to SAC and the Higg Index. And then we will speak about the BRM, the scope and purpose of the BRM, and how to assess risks and impacts, the topic of identifying hotspots and enabling positive impact. And we will walk you through basically section by section of the BRM, but at a quite high level. The BRM is a very comprehensive tool with a lot of questions, and we would not be able to, of course, to go through all those detailed questions here in this hour. In the following two sessions, the following two webinars that we will have, we will go much deeper and explain more in detail to you. And then, as I mentioned, we will have time for questions and discussion. And then in 1 hour, we will be finished with this webinar. So let me begin with the introduction to SAC and the Higg Index. And I will do that briefly. I'm aware that many of you are very much knowledgeable about SAC, and many of you are also members of SAC who are joining today. So Sustainable Apparel Coalition was founded in 2010 and is based in San Francisco, USA. But the SAC in the meantime also has offices in Amsterdam and in Hong Kong. And it is a network for positive social and environmental transformation and change within the apparel, footwear, and textile industry. SAC is one of the leading alliances for sustainable production. And SAC's vision that is of an apparel, footwear, and textile industry with no unnecessary environmental harm and a positive impact on people and communities. And SAC is also an industry-wide group of leading apparel and footwear brands, retailers, manufacturers, NGOs, etc. So you can see the whole landscape here. And in total, currently, it may change on a daily basis sometimes. There are 253 very diverse members of global stakeholders. And so the core of SAC and of the work of SAC is really the Higg Index. So from the very beginning, more than 10 years ago, the idea was to develop a measurement tool that could help brands and retailers and manufacturers to always measure their sustainability impact and to improve it. At the beginning, the tools were very much focused on environment, but in the meantime, as you know, the expansion has been done to the social area as well. And so it is a suite of tools that enables brands, retailers, and facilities of all sizes at every stage in their sustainability journey. And at every stage in the sustainability journey, this is also important to know, because from the very beginning, those tools were developed to be, in a way, aspirational. So it would not be possible to reach, like, for example, a full score within the first year you use one of the tools. The idea is really that you should also always have a potential for improvements. So that's really important. They are all very challenging, and you can move on to that aspirational level and reach further and further in terms of your performance. So the tools give you a great possibility to make really meaningful improvements. And so let us just walk through the tools. So you have the different tools you have. So we have the brand and retail module, and that is, of course, the main topic of today. We have the facilities modules on the environmental side, the FEM, and on the social side, the FSLM, which you also know with the name of SLCP, since SLCP is the organization that actually runs that social program. And finally, we have the MSI, the Material Sustainability Index, and the product module. And the facility tools and the brand and retail module are already available on the Higg core platform. But the MSI, which is available on its own website for now, will soon be transferred over to the Higg core platform, and the product module will also soon be launched, probably at the beginning of 2021. But now let's move on and focus on the brand and retail module. So what is the background here? Well, research has showed that there was a lot of skepticism about the selectivity in product-only claims, so the labels you can see on the product, because you may have one or a collection of really great sustainability products or more sustainable products, but perhaps the brand behind it is not that sustainable. So there was always the understanding within the SAC community that you need to have an assessment not only at product level or at the facility level, but really also at the brand level. So the brand scores, they are supposed to be more holistic and representative of the ethos driving an organization. So it's really more of at a strategic level, but I can tell you that many of the questions are also really very detailed, related to how brands and retailers drive their sustainability program. So hopefully, we think that consumers should be happy to use brand scores as shorthand to trust and a contributor to purchase decisions and also to brand loyalty. And of course, for brands, it is important to measure how well their strategic and management work is done. So it is, of course, also an internal tool, but you can communicate the results. So the BRM is a comprehensive assessment tool to holistically evaluate sustainability risks and impacts across their organization's entire value chain and identify top priority actions to reduce them. So you have the measurement tool, you have the possibility to understand much more about your impacts, risks, and also opportunities, and then to identify top priority actions. So the Higg BRM helps you to learn what's most important for your organization, and it covers actually nearly 30 environmental and social impacts and risks to help you prioritize. So you can see on the right-hand side here some of those risks and impacts. You have, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, water use, biodiversity, animal welfare, waste, you have child labor, forced labor, gender-based violence in the workplace, health and safety, etc. So the whole range of topics that we know within the environmental and social area. And the module also helps you to prioritize across your value chain. So the BRM questions cover the full value chain from supply chain to end of use. So what is included here? Well, you can see it here on the screen, the management system. So basically the overarching management system. And then if you look at the life cycle, but mirrored into the actual corporation, we have product development, we have supply chain management. So it can be included with the purchasing, for example, the way you deal with your suppliers, packaging, transportation, distribution centers, offices and retail stores, and product use, and end of use, EOU, end of use. And with this construct now, we have a really great tool structure, because we do cover everything that has to do with your business and with your products. All right. So as a third aspect, the BRM also helps you to discover actions that create real progress. So in addition to impacts, the BRM includes a range of actions to help you reach whatever level of progress your organization wants to achieve. And so let's have a look at let's have a look at some of those actions on the right. So you have, for example, questions related to impact and risk assessment. So this is basically the understanding your status quo. Where are you today? Where are your impacts, risks, and opportunities? And then to build your strategy based on that, measurement, setting targets and tracking progress, having people who are accountable for driving the program and measuring the results, your impact reduction, etc. And you see here also a long list, responsible purchasing, disclosure, etc. And you can see also that some of those elements here are very similar to the ones that you would see in the Higg FEM or in the FSLM as well. So let's say the mindset within the BRM is very similar to the Higg FEM and FSLM, although of course many of the questions are very different, and the final purpose is of course also different. So now let's have a look at some of the, or not all, the different sections of the brand and retail module. So let's go there. So in general, the Higg brand and retail module is divided into 6 sections. The company profile, the management system with environment and social labor, the retailer section with environment and social labor, the store section the brand section with environment and social labor, and the store section, again, with environment and social and labor, and operations and logistics, and here too with environment and social labor. So all sections but the company profile are always divided into 2 parts, one about environment and one about social and labor. And the applicable sections, retailer, brand, and stores, they depend on your unique business. So the applicability is determined by the answers in the company profile. So here in the company profile, you will be responding to questions related to your business. So do you sell products as a retailer? So do you sell other brands' products, or do you only sell your own products? Do you sell your own products yourself, or do you have a wholesale operation taking care of the sales for you, etc. So, and then based on your responses here in the company profile, you will get the corresponding questions in the retailer, brand, and store sections. And you will get only the questions that are really applicable to your operations. The other sections, company profile, of course, but then also management system and operations and logistics. Those are sections where all brands and retailers will respond to all questions. Okay, so going to the first section, the company profile. And here it is really about, as I mentioned, to identify the business use case. So what type of organization are you exactly? Are you a brand, a retailer, or are you perhaps even a mixture of both? And then it also includes information about country ownership, which business model, product types, revenue, volumes, distribution regions, and number of employees, for example. And when we move on, so of course this is just standard information basically that you insert also in order to give the basic information, but of course also in order to get the correct sections with the questions applicable to you. So now if we go to the management system and we go to the environment part first, the management system ensures the foundation for progress. And the management system regarding environment requires you to evaluate and map operations and supply chain. It also requires you to perform an environmental risk assessment and identify risks, impacts, and opportunities. And I always stress, don't forget the opportunities. You may have a lot of risks, you may have a lot of impacts, but you always also have a lot of opportunities. And of course, it's important to understand them. Perhaps they are even the most interesting. Perhaps you need to manage risk in order to be compliant, let's say, to reach a very basic level. But where it is really interesting, that is in reducing your impact and creating value out of your opportunities. So that perspective, thinking in that perspective is so important as well. So in order to do that, you need to have a great understanding of your entire value chain. You need to map it and then develop your risk assessment along your value chain and for all sustainability aspects. Then you also develop pathways for improvement in impact, risk, and opportunity areas based on your assessment. So you should fill the gaps related to impacts and risks, but also seek to capitalize on the opportunities. For example, saving energy, consolidating the supply chain, getting a better reputation as a sustainable brand or retailer, improving the livelihoods in your supply chain. Then you should also report on scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So far, many companies have already measured and perhaps also reported on scope 1 and 2, but now they are challenged to report also on scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So this means that the emissions related to, for example, employee commuting, transport, the entire supply chain, etc., are also required. And so that is a really, really big step, and it's quite a complicated process to calculate the scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. Then next step is to engage with company leadership, staff, and stakeholders to execute the environmental strategy. You need to build awareness, knowledge, and finally also the culture for a great sustainability strategy. That takes time. And of course, you need to have the right persons in place. You need to identify the staff responsible for coordinating the environmental management activities. And of course, you need to support them in doing their job as well. And finally, to develop strategies to increase employee accountability and public transparency around the environmental risk management. And that is, may not be mentioned here, but you also need to integrate sustainability into the business, build your business cases, and of course, create improvements. And the integration into the core of your business is so important. We have seen over the past decades how people who are responsible for environment, for example, they are sitting in a location where they don't have really access to the different business functions, or they have difficulties in reaching the different business functions. So it's so important to make sure that you integrate sustainability and environment into the different business functions. So you basically need to create with procurement, with the design, etc. You need to create that awareness and build the bridge to them so that they can also manage their part of the business. And here now you can see some specific environmental risk and assessment categories for the environmental management system according to BRM. So for instance, greenhouse gas emissions, water use, etc. All the ones that we are so familiar with. And you can see also that included into the environmental aspects is also animal welfare. So it's not a separate topic, it's just included into the environmental section. And now let's focus on the social and labor part of the management system. So here it requires you to again evaluate operations and map your supply chain, perform a social and human rights risk assessment, and identify risks, impacts, and opportunities. So do you have risks of impacting people's well-being, their health? Do they earn at least the minimum wage, but better even a living wage? So all those questions are very similar to the environmental risk assessment. You would do the same on the social and human rights side. Then you have to develop pathways for improvement in key risk areas, but also, of course, develop different opportunities and use the opportunities you have. Engage with company leadership, staff, and stakeholders to execute the social and human rights strategy. So, for example, is your procurement function really pulling in the same direction as you are, or do they have their own procurement strategies that you cannot follow, or that makes it very difficult for you to ensure that you have fair labor conditions in your supply chain? So that's of course a very critical question if that would be the case. You also should identify staff responsible for setting social human rights activities and standards, and ensure also, of course, the technical competence to do so. And then demonstrate social and human rights standards, grievance mechanisms, and monitoring within company operations. And finally, develop strategies to increase employee accountability and public transparency around social and human rights risk management. So what you can see now after having seen the management system part for both environment and social labor, so they are very much compatible, very much harmonized and aligned. So when you go do the environmental path, you have your questions, but on the social, when you go down the social path, it's just basically applied to all social questions, but you have the same type of questions here. And this is true for all the other sections that we have as well. So always the environment and the social paths, they are always very much aligned. And on this slide now you can see some specific social and human rights risk assessment categories for the social and labor management system. So also many of us know all those items already. Some are perhaps more clearly described here and described more in detail. For example, trafficking is mentioned here. Responsible sourcing as such. Do you have sourcing practices that actually support you in ensuring that you have really good labor standards? Right to health, right to privacy, right to security of the person, etc. Land rights, communities' rights. So some of those are some of the topics that are perhaps not so often mentioned specifically in social compliance auditing, the conventional social compliance auditing. And let me just now give you a few examples. We cannot go too much into detail here, but I will give you a few examples of questions in those different sections. So regarding the environment, you get asked, for example, were standards or resources referenced in your process to identify your risks, impact, and opportunities? And then if you then click yes, you can see at the bottom here, then you should also select which standards or resources that were referenced. That could be, for example, did you use UN Global Compact? Did you use ISO 14001? Did you use an internal framework or any other standard? And then on the other hand, with the social and labor management system, for example, you have to reply to a question if your company has internal social and human rights and labor workplace standards, or if you have an internal compliance program such as a code of conduct. And very often, similar to the Higg FEM, you will also have follow-up questions. So if you say yes, you may receive additional questions that you should respond to. And also, if you respond no, sometimes there is no follow-up question, but sometimes there is a follow-up question regarding related to your no. So let's continue with the section retailer. And here, regarding environmental aspects, the section requires you to assess, track, improve, and communicate the environmental impacts and attributes and certifications of products sold from other brands. So, of course, not everyone will receive those questions here. If you are not a retailer at all, you will not receive those questions here. But otherwise, if you are a retailer, you will. And then incorporate sustainability factors into purchasing decisions from partner brands. Engage partner brands to establish shared environmental goals and incentivize and support performance improvement. This is something that SAC seeks to encourage in all their tools. So in the Higg FEM, the facility environmental module, for example, the facilities are also asked to engage with their own supply chain. So basically with the idea, a trickle down effect or trickle up effect of the different tools in the supply chain and for brands as well. And then consider partners providing end of use services for the product. So end of use could, for example, also be repair services. And on the social and labor side, you are required to establish and track adherence to social, human rights, and labor standards for all partner brands, assess, track, and communicate the social, human rights attributes and certifications of products sold from other brands, incorporate social and human rights factors into purchasing decisions from partner brands, And finally, incentivize and provide support and resources for your partner brands to improve their the social and human rights performance. And here again, I would like to give you a few examples from the actual questions that you have. So regarding the environment in the retailer section, you will have to fill in if your company assesses the environmental impacts of the products you sell from other brands. So the first question you can see here. And for example, the next question is, does your company track the percentage of products it sells from other brands that have sustainability attributes? So we are going quite far here. And finally, does your company, or the third question here, does your company have a means of communicating the environmental attributes or certifications of its products to customers? So quite detailed questions. And on the social and labor side, similarly, for instance, you have to fill in if your company has social standards in place that you and your partner brands and their products must meet, or policies they must follow. Or secondly, if you have means to evaluate how well your brand partners performance align with your social and human rights policies. And when we come to brand, we have in the section you are required to assess, track, and improve and communicate the environmental impacts and attributes and certifications of material components used to create the products. So this is also a very far-reaching requirement. You should also map your supply chain through production tiers and publicly disclose your supply chain. Although in the past year, many brands have published their supplier lists. In my view, there are still many who don't. So this would be an important step for those brands, beginning with creating buy-in internally and specifically, of course, with the purchasing department. And then to create an environmental impact improvement program and an action plan to drive improvements in your supply chain, for example, by using a Higg FEM, the Facility Environmental Module. And if you are an SAC member, then you will also be asked to do so. So that is also a member requirement that you will roll out the Higg FEM and the FSLM, of course, in your supply chain. And then we have to monitor and reduce resource consumption, and finally to assess, monitor, and improve environmental risks throughout your supply chain. And furthermore, it requires you to engage your supply chain partners to develop shared environmental risk management goals, to incentivize and support performance improvement, to assess, track, improve, and communicate the environmental impacts and attributes of consumer and transport packaging for your products, to assess, track, improve, and communicate the environmental impact of your products during consumer use and at end of use, and then to reduce the environmental impact of your products during consumer use and at end of use through inventory management, consumer care guidance, take-back programs, and leasing or rental programs. So you see here we have two slides covering the environmental requirements environment on the environmental side. So you have a lot of requirements in the environmental section here. In the social and labor section, you are asked to assess, track, improve, and communicate the social and human rights impacts, attributes, and certifications of your products and their material components. So again, similar to the environmental section. Set a social and human rights impact improvement program and an action plan in order to drive improvements. And this could be done with the FSLM module, which is of course managed by the SLCP organization. Engage suppliers and manufacturers to develop shared social human rights goals, incentivize performance improvement, and share improvement resources and tools. And finally, to establish a responsible purchasing program, ensuring fair payment, forecasting and ordering, as well as cancellation terms for all supply chain partners. And we have, of course, seen now during the COVID-19 crisis how important it is to have contracts in place that also safeguard the supplier's existence and survival. So let's have again a few examples from the BRM online tool, beginning with the environment. Well, there we have questions, for example, related to, has your company implemented practices to reduce resource consumption in key impact areas in its supply chain? Or does your company measure the effectiveness of its environmental program? On the social side, does your company have an action plan to mitigate harm and improve the social human rights performance of its supply chain? Or does your company measure the effectiveness of its social and human rights program? And here, now I would like to hand over to Saskia for this part of the presentation. Saskia, please.
Thank you, Karin. Yes, I will now talk about sections 4 and 5. The fourth section is about stores. So if you have stores, you will have to fill in this section. And regarding the environment, it requires you to set an environmental impact improvement program for retail stores. And this could cover energy savings, water savings, or installing more sustainable furnishings, for example. It requires you to establish and monitor an action plan to drive improvements in stores' environmental impacts, to monitor and reduce resource consumption in retail stores, with a focus on energy and water consumption, for example, and to develop communication methods for stores' environmental impact strategy and outcomes. In terms of social and labor, the stores section requires you to set and implement social or human rights and labor standards for all your retail stores, to establish and monitor an action plan to drive improvements in stores' social or human rights performance, to ensure that all retail stores comply with local labor laws and all store employees receive fair wages and benefits, and to engage outside stakeholders to address systemic challenges to social and human rights improvements in retail. And last but not least, to develop communication methods for social or human rights impact strategy and outcomes. And we will also have a look at some question examples for this section. So in this section, with a focus on environment, we have questions like, has your company established a program aimed at improving environmental performance within its stores? Or, for example, has your company implemented practices to reduce resource consumption in key impact areas in stores? And with the focus on social and labor in the section stores, there are questions like, have internal social or human rights and labor workplace standards been implemented in your stores in the last calendar year? Or have any stores been cited for labor violations? So this could be questions you would have to answer. The last section is operations and logistics. And again, we have two parts. In terms of environmental aspects, this section requires you to set an environmental impact improvement program and an action plan to drive improvements for all your offices, transportation operations, and distribution centers. And to monitor and reduce resource consumptions in all those offices and distribution centers, again with a focus on energy and water consumption, but also waste and paper may be relevant in many organizations. You have to track and monitor efficiency of inbound and outbound transportation methods. And it's important to engage transportation partners to prioritize efficient methods of transportation and low carbon fuel sources. Here we think it's very important to challenge forwarders to measure their impacts and make the results available to brands and retailers, as well as supporting with improvement programs. Because in our experience, we often see forwarders who are not willing or able to really support. And the last point, it's important to develop communication methods for environmental improvement strategies and outcomes for your offices, transportation operations and distribution centers. And these communication methods may not need to be different from the general communication approaches for external or internal communication. We believe that internal communication is very important to create awareness and engagement from all your employees. And yeah, especially the office or distribution centers impacts may be very, very interesting for them to learn more about. And of course, also support in improving. Regarding social and labor, this section, operations and logistics, requires you to set social and human rights and labor standards and an action plan to drive improvements for employees in offices, transportation operations, and distribution centers, to ensure that all those offices, transportation operations and distribution centers comply with local labor laws, and all employees receive fair wages and benefits. It requires you to engage outside stakeholders to address systemic challenges to social and human rights improvements, and also to develop communication methods for social or human rights improvement strategies and outcomes for offices, transportation operations, and distribution centers. And here we can also expect that more advanced HR practices be in place, such as gender diversity, diversity in general, work-life balance, and other aspects. And let's also have a look at some question examples for this final section. In this section with a focus on environment, we have questions like, has your company established a program aimed at improving the environmental performance within its offices? Or, for example, does your company have an action plan to improve the environmental performance of its offices? Regarding social and labor, there are questions such as, have your transportation operations been cited for labor violations? Or do all transportation operations have a social or human rights responsibility program in place? Yeah, these were all the sections we covered, and now I'm handing back to Karin.
Thank you so much, Saskia. So how can we support the process, the progress here, and what has SAC done in order to support the progress? So there are several tools available from SAC. And for example, one of them is this tool, an Excel template, in order to help set and track targets. So where you can establish where you are now and where you want to go, first with your leadership team and then also throughout your organization. So it's perhaps a bit of a blurry screenshot here, but you write down the business area, the person and department responsible, which main risk or impact that was addressed, target description, etc. And perhaps if you are a larger company, you probably already have your own tools and templates to set targets. And then the next step is also the possibility to measure. So all the sections and questions are scored here in the Higg BRM, and that means that for every section you will be able to see your scores. For example, you can see here distribution center, management system, offices, packaging, and then you can see what your total score is, but you can see also the split into environment and social. And for example, in this case, this example here, the total environmental score was 70.8% and the social score was 49%. And of course, as with the Higg FEM, there is an external communications toolkit. The toolkit for the BRM is still in development. So what you can see what it would look like here, and here you actually see the example now from the facilities from the Higg FEM, since it is not finished for BRM, but you can imagine it will look very similar for the BRM. So you have a badge that you can use, you have a scorecard, and you have a performance report. And the idea is that at least for the Higg FEM, as soon as you have verified your self-assessment, you can also communicate externally on your website or even on your even with business cards, for example. And of course, you can always share the results on the platform. That you can always do also with self-assessments. So that is also a really very big step forward for SAC. It has always been the aspiration to be able to communicate results to consumers and other stakeholders at all levels within the Higg Index. Okay, and so with that, we have come to the end of our presentation about the BRM, and I wonder if we have any questions coming in. So do you have questions for us? Yeah. So there is one question here. How often do I have to fill out the questionnaire? Is it every year, every second year? It is every year. If you are a member of SAC, then you will be requested to fill out the BRM module on an annual basis. So this year, for example, the deadline is actually end of September to complete the BRM for all members. It should have been earlier, but it has been postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis. So once a year to complete the BRM, exactly like with the Higg FEM, and you also use the calendar year then. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Well, here is one question. Is there any integration with other environmental management systems to streamline info gathering? That is a really good question and a good request. Currently, there is not, but there will be work done, and there is work done in order to understand how we can build equivalences with other information that is already available. So there is a big work stream working on the verification procedure for the BRM. And that work stream is also looking at how to use the information available in other locations, in other systems, but also how to use how to use equivalences in order to support the data gathering. And then the next question here is, supplier has to complete BRM in September 2020. No, if you are a supplier, a manufacturing entity, you are not required to complete the BRM. There may be larger supplier manufacturing houses that see themselves as brands as well, or perhaps have their own brands too. They may be mainly manufacturers, but also may have their own brands. They may want to complete the BRM as well. But if you are a manufacturer, you do not need to do that. So if you are a manufacturer, a member manufacturer of Sustainable Apparel Coalition, then you need to complete the Higg FEM, or perhaps you have brands or buyers who ask you to complete the Higg FEM or the Higg FSLM, the SLCP. Okay. No further questions. Okay. You will have another opportunity then in 1 week from now when we go into the deep dive of the Higg BRM. So let me then just continue, and I have some more information for you. So we are interested in getting to know you more, and if you would like to have support, then we are of course really happy to support you with any part of the Higg BRM. We have the experience, as you know, from brands as well, so we know how it is and what it is and what you need to do in order to be successful with the Higg BRM. So please feel free to contact us. We are a member of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, And we can offer you a comprehensive portfolio of SAC-related services, for example, related to materiality assessment and strategy, value chain approach, strategy development, business cases as well. We can also support you with sustainable supply chain management, with material strategies and certifications, just to name a few things. So please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us directly, or you can also go to our booking page and take the steps that you can see here, and then you can book an appointment with me in this case. Okay, and then here is our team. We have a growing team, and you can see Saskia is here, for example, and then we have Laura, Sophia, and Julia, who are our team members here in Germany. And then you see our team members also in Turkey, in India, in Tunisia, and in Bangladesh and in Vietnam. So we are really happy to have such a large and growing team already on board. And with that, I see that there may have been one question more coming up. Yes, the question is, when brand will complete the BRM, then will the result appear to the supplier on the manufacturing portal? I don't think so. It may be that you as a supplier can request from your brand the information about their BRM. You can do that on the portal. But I'm not sure that you can do that. I know that you can do that with the facilities modules, but I'm not really sure if you can do that also with the BRM. So we will need to check that. But with that, I would like to thank you so much for joining this webinar. And please join us for our next webinars as well, next week and in the week after. If you don't have the dates, please reach out to us and we will inform you. And with that, we will close this webinar. Thanks a lot and take care. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.